You are listening to Beyond the Measure, episode 45. Listen as I, a young composer, and my wife, a young choir director, interview other music educators in order to gain insight into their own success in the classroom. We have a lot to learn, and we want you to learn with us. No matter your age, ensemble, or experience, this is the ideal podcast for music educators, composers, and students alike. So join us as we go beyond the measure.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. My name is Kara.
And my name's Christian.
And this is the Beyond the Measure podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, we are a podcast that interviews different music educators around America, or I don't know, we haven't done across the globe.
I don't think we've done any out of country
Across the globe yet.
But hey, we'll get there eventually.
But we just glean from their experiences and learn as much as we can from them.
That's right. And so today we have another great interview with another great guest. We have Mr. Bryce Gage, who is the choir director at Marble Falls High School in Marble Falls, Texas. One
really exciting thing that's coming up for Bryce and his choirs is that they're going to be performing at TMEA this year. So TMEA is going to be right around the corner. So please just go and show your support.
Yeah, we're really excited to hear them. It's going to be great. So a couple of big things that we got out of this conversation. Number one, so Bryce is the choir director at a smaller school. He's at a 4A school, and so he speaks a lot into some of the difficulties and differences that you might have in a small school program versus a large school program, and how at the end of the day, you can still be very, very successful with a smaller group. It's very easy for some of us, especially those of us that come from larger school backgrounds, to maybe go to a smaller school and not quite understand, okay, how does this look different from being in a large school? And so this is a great conversation to glean a lot of information about that. And another big thing that Bryce talks about is the importance of tone, and how tone is basically the foundation of everything else that you do when teaching music. And this is the case from what we talked about, not just for choir, but for band and orchestra as well. If you can have a solid unified tone in your ensemble, then everything else is going to become exponentially easier to achieve. We briefly touched on this as well with Mary Jane Phillips a few episodes back when we talked about tone as well. So this is a great extension of that conversation. So again, regardless of whether you do band, choir, orchestra, this is still a very applicable conversation for you across the aisle. So once again, if you enjoy these episodes, if you enjoy this podcast, we would really, really appreciate it if you leave us a rating or review on whichever platform you listen to. And hey, if you really, really like it, even share it with some other music educators that you know. That's a great way to help this podcast grow. So without further ado, here is our interview with Mr. Bryce Gage. Alrighty, well, Bryce, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, so we have a few mutual connections, but could you start by just telling us what you do currently in the music world?
Yeah, I am the high school choir director at Marble Falls High School in Marble Falls, Texas. We're a 4A school down in the Hill Country that is we're about an hour outside of Austin and about an hour and 15 minutes north of San Antonio. We're a Title I school in a resort kind of retirement area. And so our school doesn't necessarily look like our community. And so that's what I do. I teach full time. I've been doing it for 26 years. I'm starting my 26th year actually right now. And before here, I've been here in Marble Falls 19 years. Before that, I was in Sherman, Texas, and then I taught a year in McKinney and 3 in Denton.
So just to get into this, could you tell our listeners kind of how you got into music to begin with, and kind of what that journey has looked like for you from then all the way until now?
Yeah. The Reader's Digest version, of course, I was born in the mid to late 1900s. And so I was from Oklahoma, a little bitty town. My parents actually sang in a group with all their first cousins touring the Southwest. It was an a cappella group in the 70s called the Gage Cousins. They recorded several albums and they did all that. And so I didn't want to have any part of that because my parents sang, so I didn't want to do that. So I was an athlete. And I finally took choir in high school my senior year because I was kind of forced into it. So I did it. Then went off to college at Oklahoma Christian up in the Oklahoma City area, Oklahoma Christian University, not to be confused with Oklahoma City University, Oklahoma Christian University, very small liberal arts school up there. And did not graduate, had some life changes and moved back home, and took a couple of different routes, performed a year in Branson, Missouri, and then decided to go back to school, went to UNT. Graduated from UNT, doing quite a bit of performing at the time, and then decided that I didn't like the lifestyle of the performing side because it's just busy, and wanted a family, and I didn't really enjoy rehearsing, which is what you do all the time. So really stepped into education and taught at the middle school level for 4 years as assistant directors, and then became a head director of a 5A high school. That was a learning experience. That was when I was in Sherman. And then was there for about 3 years, and then moved to Marble Falls. Followed a friend who became the principal at Marble Falls, and the program was pretty. It wasn't great. It was not good. There were only 19 kids in the high school program. There were like 25 in the middle school, and so they hired me to do that, and just kind of grew it from there through the years. There's 2 directors at the high school now, me and Clark Stanley, currently my assistant. And then there's 2 directors at the middle school also. And so we have a nice, thriving program for a 4A school. We have about 1,100 kids in our high school and probably about 160 or so in the choir program at the high school.
I was going to say, I have been to Sherman as well in my travels for work, and Marble Falls is probably quite a big change from a place like Sherman as far as the geographics.
Yeah, the geographics and like the student makeup, but Marble Falls is pretty much a small town, even though it's kind of big. I mean, there's about 8,000 people inside the city limits. But our school district encompasses about 250 square miles. It's a pretty big district in that regard, but we really are a community school. And I grew up in Oklahoma in a really small school. I graduated with 40 kids back in long time ago. And so I'm really more of a small town kid. So I'm not a kid anymore, but you know how that goes.
Right. Yeah. Well, and both of us, Kara and I, we both grew up in larger city areas in the suburbs.
Yeah.
Kara, you were in Fort Worth and I was in Austin. And coming to Abilene, Abilene is not a small town by any means. It's a lot bigger than most people think, but it still feels like a small town.
Yep.
And so even that to us was kind of a culture shock in many ways, but we've really grown to love it. So
Yeah.
we highly respect that.
There's lots of benefits to being in a small town. One of the benefits, like growing up, was like growing up around my cousins and my grandparents and all of that. And then my wife and we have children here, and my wife's mother lives here, and so my kids are around their grandparents too. So that's those are one of the small town things that are really nice.
So you recently spoke at TCDA, right? And
I did.
What was kind of the focus of that session you did?
My session was called Big Success for Small Schools. And it's really a focus of like how to build a program in a smaller community and overcoming some of those obstacles that don't typically happen in larger schools or larger communities, but they really do. There were some large school people there too. It's really about building a program and building a choir, and the things I did through the years, or continue to do. Most of the things I still continue to do. Because if you don't keep working at it, it'll go away.
So what would you say? I say we, but I mean mainly Kara, obviously, because Kara was the director of high school and junior high program for her first year. Was that 3A? 2A?
It was 3A.
It was a 3A.
2C.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, which is in Clyde, just outside of Abilene here. And so I know, Kara, you got a little taste of some of the struggles you can have at a smaller program like that, and so I'm sure you can speak into this as well. But Bryce, what would you say are some of the biggest hurdles that typically a lot of small school programs run into compared to the larger schools?
Oh, I think there's a lot. One of the things that is imperative that has to happen, and we know that it has to happen in all programs, but even so, more so, like I think in smaller programs, when I say smaller programs, smaller schools and smaller communities, is the relationship building, and it has to go far beyond just the classroom, building them with your kids. You've got to build them inside of with your faculty and with your parents, but you have to build them in the community, because community support is essential in small schools. Because I mean, if it's not there, you're not going to last long. I think that is really big. I think one of the problems too is sometimes just a lack of knowledge on from a community or administrator standpoints or a school standpoints, or wherever they're at in the kind of programs they've had. Sometimes the lack of knowledge can be detrimental to the choir, because so everybody has a band, pretty much. They've got a football team, so they got a band, and I get that, and that's not knocking them. That's just the natural progression of the way that works. With us, sometimes they kind of look at us as, do they really need you, or you just sing? We just need someone to sing the national anthem, or can you come sing Happy Birthday to the teachers? And so, overcoming that lack of knowledge of the purpose of us and what we do and what we can do in bringing together community and creating skills inside these students and inside the community that last for a long time. I think that's really hard to do. If you don't have a small town mindset, and I'm not saying us being small-minded, I'm saying understanding smaller communities, it makes it a little bit more difficult in that regard, because many times you're going to have administrators that may not necessarily be a little bit more well-rounded as they possibly could because of the lack of possibilities of where they're at and what they've done. So it's our job to kind of educate them at the same time. And how do you do that? Those are the big ones.
The times that we've had conversations like this in relation to, large school, small school, or maybe a better way to put it is large quantity or low quantity of students and or resources. Mm-hmm. It seems like, obviously you want to have as high quality, relationships and individual attention to your students as you can. Obviously that's harder with a larger program, by default, but something about having a smaller amount of students, you really have no choice but to focus on the quality of your relationship with the students and their voices and growing them as individuals. Because like you said, I think you're exactly right. If you don't have that, there's just a lack of connection there that's just going to continue to snowball into, everything kind of dissolving over time, I feel like.
And there is the, for lack of a better term, the looking down up on the smaller schools or the smaller school programs of being less than just because we have less kids. And less kids doesn't necessarily mean less kids in our programs, because there are as big numbers in some small schools choir programs as there are in 6A programs that have access to 3,000 kids in their high school, whereas we only have 1,100.
Okay, would you like a way to create a special moment, a unique memory that only you and your students can share? Is there a certain audience you will be performing for and you want just the right type of music for the occasion? Or perhaps you're just in need of a piece that has a specific voicing, range, or theme that you haven't been able to find anywhere else. Last time I checked, publishers weren't scrambling to create music for a bassoon, alto voice, and accordion trio, but maybe that's what you're looking for. No matter the reason or the instrumentation, I would love to fulfill your music needs in the form of a commission. If you're unfamiliar with what commissioning me would look like, or even any composer for that matter, you can learn more about the process at christianfortnermusic.com/commission. This includes info such as the step-by-step timeline, payment options, and more. I want to work with you so that we can create a memorable experience for everyone involved, including you, myself, the performers, and the listeners that will hear the music for years to come. Because remember, you never know whose lives will be changed for the better because of the music that came into existence because of you. So are you ready to make a new memory through new music? I am. Take the first step by filling out a commission request form at christianfortnermusic.com/commission. Hope to hear from you soon. So what would you say to somebody who may find themselves at a smaller school or going into a smaller school, and they're kind of looking around and they're like, okay, I don't know how I'm going to do this, as far as, maintaining the program. And I know there's a lot of different aspects to that. There's the student side, there's the parent side, the admin side. I mean, going into all those different sorts of things, I mean, what advice would you give to somebody that's in that situation going forward?
The best recruiter you can have is excellence, period. The best recruiter you can have is excellence. You can do every icebreaker and bring them all together and have every kind of social, all those kind of things. But if you don't have excellence, it's gonna be a struggle. And with excellence, you're going to win the parents over really quick, and you're going to win the administrators over really quick. You have to teach what's in front of you, because you can't teach what you wish you had or what you want. And you have to figure out every solution, and you have to be a constant learner, because if you're not going to continue to expand, your kids are not going to grow either. I've learned so much more teaching in small schools, and like Sherman, where I came from, that was a large school, and I'm from the time period before there was 6As. So Sherman was a 4A, which they're 5A now. They would have been 5A during that time. So I've taught in large schools, and it's a whole different ballgame. So when you have a counselor and a principal that don't understand, and they put all these kids together and just mix them in one class, boys, girls, all levels, and there's no ability-based class, what do you do, and how do you teach them, and where do you find literature? You're just going to have to study and figure it out, some of it. You've got to learn to, like, there's a whole series of music that I promote, like I try to tell people about through Briley, that they have, that it says that it's SAB with an optional T. And it's really two-part mixed if you really look at it, because the bass is singing the same as the alto and the tenor is singing the same as soprano. And that is great music. It's really good things to use with your kids when you're trying to, what are you going to do with all of them? I am also a huge proponent, even at the high school level with my mixed choirs, with everyone, that I use a lot of unison things. It is a great way to teach tone, and tone is where it's at. Like, it's just where it's at. And you got to know how to do it and find it. And not every unison piece is a great piece of music, but there is a lot of great unison music out there, and you're just searching. I spend more time listening and looking and researching literature all the time. And I try to tell new teachers, young teachers, not necessarily new, but young teachers, we're in an age right now where you can hear everything. Like, you can go on to J.W. Pepper and listen to everything, or go onto Pender's website and listen to it, or you can go onto YouTube and listen to it. And that's a bad way to pick literature. That's a really bad way to pick literature, because what you hear and then what you see when you look at it isn't always the same thing. Because the recordings, I mean, it's great. They're great recordings, but then you look at it and you think, oh, that was 5 parts, not 2, or 5 parts, not 3. That's kind of stupid. Listen, look at that voice leading in the alto. That doesn't really work. That's not going to work for my kids, or those ranges don't work. And so I think just listening, I think it's a great tool to have, but I think you got to have that music in front of you, and you got to learn to pick those right things for your kids. And then you have to know your community, what they want to hear. And you have to sprinkle it in. Like, they may not be used to everybody singing, everybody doing Mozart and Beethoven and Handel. And I'm just going to say, in small schools and high schools, you can't do that all the time anyway. But you got to learn how to introduce it where they're going to accept it and recognize it for what it is and the level that it is. So it's like, I've come a long way in Marble Falls. When they had 19 kids, they didn't know anything. I had to educate an audience on how to behave. And all it's the same thing everywhere. But yeah, I think I'm rambling right now.
No.
No,
Hey,
that's what we want.
yeah, that's right. That's the less we talk, the better. Hey, no, that's great. And well, I'll say from my perspective as a composer, and again, I learned a lot of this from, watching you, Kara, when you were at Clyde, and one of the first times I got to see a much closer view of, the situations of a lot of smaller school programs. I mean, learning to think to myself, okay, oh, maybe I should write a TB piece with no DVC, or an SAB piece, right, with a little bit of DVC in the bass baritone, right? Those kinds of things are great tools, for composers like me to really exercise writing, and to make things that are accessible for so many programs that are needing that kind of music. And which, by the way, I'll also say, writing those is way harder than you would think.
Oh yeah,
as a composer.
I started. I do a lot of commissions through our program. I just started doing it years ago, and I started with Brian Sharp. I don't know if you know him through Heritage and Lorenz, and he's a really great composer. He's one of their editors too. He looks like he's 9 years old. He's very young looking, but anyway, he is a very accomplished. And I told him, like, I set some parameters, and he still writes for my high school groups at Christmas. And he'll write for my varsity groups, but I'm a 4A varsity. I have 4A varsity groups, and and I would say we sing very well, and we have a very accomplished program. But I don't want things that are like super, super difficult. Like at Christmas, I want beautiful stuff and things that are going to ring in with my community and with my parents. And so, in fact, the last couple of pieces have been a mixture of English and Spanish, because I have a large Hispanic community. I want it to be songs that they're going to recognize, and I want it to be things that can be accessible to other people. So, like my varsity women who can sing in 4 and 5 and 6 parts. I don't want anything more than SSA. Like, I want a unison section in it. I want to be able to teach some skills through it. And he does a fantastic job, but I look for those kind of things when I'm teaching that. And I think, like, and I'll say, like, SAB music is really hard. It just is. It's hard to find well-written SAB or even 3-part mix, however you want to call it, because not all those boys are the same. And so that's why I like that Briley section of where they have that SAB with that optional T. So they do put that part in there that maybe they are matching with the sopranos just an octave low, singing the same notes. But you don't have to bring that out to the kids. I mean, they might recognize it, they may not, and you can at some point. But it also gives those boys that can't sing that B a chance to sing in their own octave and not have to leave out notes. So I really think that that's a brilliant way. And the main composer that's doing that is Dan Davison on that. He also has a couple of them through Walton, but he has like 6 or 8 of them through Briley. And some of them are already on the UIL list because they're just well written for those kids. And they're great. It's great middle school, like upper level middle school and beginning high school. And it just falls in really well for us. So I've used them quite frequently.
Cool. Yeah. And I'll say, I remember, I'll just throw this in there for, if there are any composers listening. It's been a couple years now, but I'm sure it hasn't really changed. Every now and then I'm in those choir director Facebook groups, and that's actually how we originally connected, was through there. But every now and then I'll ask questions or put out a poll or something from a composer's perspective about, what are, choir directors looking for in terms of music related things. And a couple years ago, I'd put out a poll saying, what voicing of music do you find yourself most in need of? And the top 2 were SAB and SA. And I think part of me feels like SA, just because there are always so many girls in choir. It's just more of a quantity thing. Like there's just a lot that's out there that you always need more. But I feel like SAB is more of that, that we don't have enough of that.
Yeah.
from my perception, at least.
And I would think the SA kind of hits that. I always, coming from a smaller school and what we can do, I'm in a weird mindset of like how literature really works. I look at the grade 2 and grade 3 list on the UIL, and I hear middle schools do them all the time. I judge a lot, and you hear them, the girls' choirs do those 2 grade 2s and grade 3s, and sometimes you'll hear a middle school hop into grade 4. Much of that literature is really not middle school literature. It really is high school literature, and there's a couple pieces that just come to mind off the top of my head that I think it's that are grade twos. That the tempo marking of the composer, that if you wanted to keep it authentic, that middle school choir couldn't handle it from the breath support, and they want to sing it, and that's great. I want them. I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but sometimes like those things, I use a lot of that with my girls, building tone and just doing great literature. This past year, we sang, my varsity women at UIL did the Poet Sings, a grade 3, which the grade 3 is as hard as we have to sing. It's not what we do, because we're on the grade 4 and grade 5 list all the time, even have ventured onto the grade 6. But we did the Poet Sings with my varsity women. And 2 of the judges said it was the best performance of the Poet Sings that they had ever heard. Because, one, it was sung probably closer to what Stroop wanted, at a slower tempo with much more rubato and much more word stress that can happen, and the ability to grow in those sections. And when it gets to that, what I call the B section, where it has you probably know it, where it goes to the Mariah section, where it's the D to D, which kind of sits in a funky place for girls' voices because it's in that passaggio area. But when you're an older singer and you have a little bit more control of that, all of a sudden they get a big, more warm, round sound in that area, and it has a deeper meaning. And you can hear that in those girls. So I think sometimes people are like, oh, I need more SA music, or I need more SSA music, and they're not willing to explore what's in the grade 2 and grade 3 areas, because there's some beautiful things in there that get labeled as middle school music, because that's who we hear do it. And I don't buy into that. Now, I'm not against there being new music, and I agree. I'm always looking for new things, because I want to sprinkle things in and find new composers and that kind of stuff. But there's a plethora of music that is out there. My wife will be glad that I use the word plethora. But there is a plethora of music out there that can still be explored, that sometimes we don't explore it because we labeled it wrong, kind of like how we label small schools.
Right. Well, now, I was going to say, like, when I think about, I don't know why my mind went to this, but again, I'm just thinking from the composer perspective. Sometimes I feel like the type of group that I might be writing for, let's say for a commission, I just automatically jump to the conclusion of, oh, I need to write to the top of their ability, right? Yeah. Which is not the case, right? And because I think part of me sometimes is like, oh, I don't want them to be insulted, right? I wrote such an easy thing for them, right? But when I think about, mainly this just came to mind, like a lot of film scores. I mean, unless you're looking at like John Williams or, Michael Giacchino or somebody like that. But a lot of movie scores, if you're really listening to what a lot of the musicians are playing, it's really not that complex. It's not hard.
Not at all.
And yet, they still hire professional musicians to play these, because they're still going to be able to showcase that musical capability and how they bring that simplicity to life and pour that much depth and emotion into it. And and the exact same goes for our ensembles.
I think you're exactly right, from the composer standpoint or from the choral standpoint, that finding those things. Like, I had a really good friend that I'm sure that we have a TMEA choir this year, and that we're performing at TMEA. And as I was choosing my program for that, one of my dear, really good friends, Heather Orr, one of her statements, and she's from Montgomery, which is a 5A school, but it's a smaller 5A school, who's had multiple success, and she's incredible. But she was like, hey, Bryce, make sure that you're picking literature to inspire and not to impress. And so that really resounded with me, of finding things that would be inspirational, not necessarily difficult. Because I can have my kids sing as many parts as pretty much the next group if I need to, but I don't always find that literature is as inspirational or as meaning. Yes, we throw some of it in there, and we do it sometimes, but like there are some just beautifully simplistic pieces out there. I'll just, like Ken Berg's This Little Light of Mine. It's unison. It's with cello. I can have all my women sing it, and the parents are just in love with it. They know it. They recognize the tune. They recognize the tone. Randall Stroop's, it's called Two by Handle, I think. and it has Ombra Mai Fu and Lasha Kyopyanga, the two handle pieces, and they're in unison. And you can have all your women do that. I do them with strings sometimes. And just the simplicity of those lines are just stunning and moving. And I think we think more is better, more parts is better, more parts is harder, and I just don't buy it. More parts is more parts.
I think this conversation would have been really, really helpful and encouraging to me my first year of teaching whenever I did go into a small school, because I really had no idea what I was getting into. But regarding community, Clyde is a very, very small town, and I loved the kids there and the parents, very supportive, and the community as well, especially when it came to football. But what were some of the things that you did, like with your choir, that involved the community or community outreach?
Yeah. So some of it I did personal things, and then I did group and choir stuff. So one of the personal things I did, um, I I took a job at the football stadium. They needed volunteers to stand at the gates, and I said I would if I could have the gate that all the football players ran through. And then I memorized all their numbers and all their names and started speaking to every one of them and
Wow.
encouraging them. So I see them when they run on the field at the beginning of the game. I saw them when they ran off at halftime. I saw them when they ran back on at halftime when it was over, and then at the end of the game. And I spoke to them every time. So not only was I building community with them and letting them know that, hey, I'm here, I watch, I see, I understand. And to be honest, like, I know nothing about football. And it's not my sport. But I have gone to more football games in my 26 years because that's what we do. And my community loves it. And I cheer my boys on. And then I make fun of myself because I don't know it. But I did that. But at the same time, they all were like, oh, who's that guy? And I was always like, hey, y'all should come sing with us. Excuse me. And started the recruitment process there. So that was one of the things that I did early on. Now, I've been here 19 years, and I don't work a gate anymore because I know all the kids as they come through. That was part of me being new into the community, like you asked. So I did that. Then one of the things I also did is I started just making sure that my kids could be seen. So we would Christmas carol in the community and try to get in front of the Kiwanis and try to get in front of the Rotary and see if the town had a Christmas tree lighting ceremony. We sang the national anthem when we could. The band does that a lot of times. And so we now pretty much take over. We do the pep rallies. We do the national anthem pep rallies, and they do the football games. It's just more convenient. That's the way we do it. But we're not against singing at the games, and we have done some of that sometimes. But that is one way we built community, or brought in the community. Also, my kind of situation was, and I don't know what the program was like in Clyde, but ours, there wasn't a strong program at all. So they might have one concert a year with their few kids that they had. And I created a full concert series. Like, I did a fall concert and I did a Christmas concert. I started a musical in town. Like, they didn't do a musical, and I started that was kind of my background, was in musical theater and stuff. I was trained both ways in musical theater and classical, but I had a background in it. So I did that. Made sure we did a pre-UIL concert. And on my pre-UIL concert, it was more of I brought in judges, but I also wanted to have a learning experience. So I would show the whole sight reading process. And now when I show the sight reading process, like, I let the kids do the whole thing, and I just talk to the parents for the whole 6 minutes and ignore the kids while they're doing the whole thing. And then they turn around and sing, and the parents are like, how did they do that without you? And I'm like, that's because I do my job every day. That's kind of how UIL should be. There should be walking into a room and they do their thing without you having to really look at anything. So that was another way that I built community, was through a concert series and trying to getting the community at the school in the seats to hear what the kids could do. And then doing appropriate literature for them that would make them be successful, because you got to build success in the kids. And so you can't do the Mozart Jubilate Deo, which is a grade 4, when it's your first time at the high school and it's your first mixed choir. You just can't do it. You've got to do Doreen Rao's Dodie Lee, where it looks like it's SATB, but it's really ST and AB. And you've got to do things like that to build that community. Is that what you were looking for?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so going off of that, well, I would like to know. Well, first comment, something I thought of was, I imagine that just getting into the thick of it, helping out with the football, with the gate, and all those sorts of things, getting your hands dirty, I guess you could say, from day one, was much more effective than just sending an email to admin or to staff or whoever and just, hey, we need more support over here. Where are my people at?
I mean, I know how to use email and I can send emails and stuff, but I have always believed, like, I guess it was the way I was raised and my personality and my parents being in the service industry for different things and in all the responsibilities and jobs they had. And as you can see, I'm kind of a talker.
Oh, you're good.
That like I cooked for the counselors. I still randomly do. I would be like, hey, I know it's beginning of the year and you're doing new student enrollment. Hey, let me come up and cook a meal for you that day or bring you a meal. And then I would set up a booth right there where kids came in and it'd be like, hey, join choir and you get a Snickers. And I'd hand out T-shirts and all that kind of stuff. And then the counselors just started saying, hey, would you like to join choir? We have this great guy that's coming and and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm not one to sit back and like right now, and I've had all levels of principal. I mean, let's just say it. They're all out there. I've had all levels. And my current principal is phenomenal. Like I have never had a principal and I haven't had any that were just terrible. But I've had others that weren't as good. But my principal currently right now, like he spends a lot of time in the choir room. He drives the bus for us when we need it. I mean, and I could get bus drivers, but he's like, hey, let me drive. I want to go with y'all. And so like we did MadFest this past year in Dallas and he went with us for 2 days and drove the bus and just sat in and listened to all the choirs and would make comments of like, oh, that group was really good because this is what I heard. Or he comes into my classroom and goes, hey, why did you stop them when they did that? And I can take recordings to him and go, hey, listen to this and tell me what you think. And he's like, oh, that group sounds old or mature. Yep, they do. That's how. So I kind of train in him, but I mean, in the music world, but like, he's like, it wouldn't work with just an email. And I'm constantly inviting teachers into my room, constantly. And I have areas where they can sit and they want to come in and listen. So yeah, building that big community amongst everyone.
Right, right. And what I'm hearing from that is going into that kind of situation, and not just that, I mean, just being a leader in, overall is about having humility and being a servant.
Yeah.
I mean, the best leaders are servants, right? And that's how you get people's attention.
And you can't be the expert in the room until you acknowledge the experts in the room.
Right.
So I'm on a lot of committees. I do. I probably overextend myself. I don't say no very well. I want to be involved and I want to know everything that's going on. Let's just say that. But I'm on a lot of committees and I'm very quick to say when they ask, hey, what's your opinion? And I'll say, well, this is kind of what I think, but the expert in the room is so-and-so. And so what do you think? So I pass that off to try multiple reasons. I'm not the expert in the room. I want to build that relationship with who I deem is the expert in the room and let the expert make the decisions. So building that expert in the room, then they in turn, there are times when they're like, well, Bryce is the expert in the room. Like, what makes it better for you? And I'm doing that with everyone, but I'm also doing it in front of everyone. So I'm doing it in front of my administrators and I'm doing it in front of my superintendent and I'm doing it in front of school board members. And they see that like, I know my stuff. I know choir, but I also am not knowledgeable in everything. And so I don't try to be that way. I mean, sometimes I act that way because we all do, but I'm like, let's pass that off and find the real expert in the room to solve this.
And I imagine that can be especially hard to not do when you're in that sort of situation of you're the new choir director at a small school and maybe you don't have the resources you need. And you're like, no, I literally know that I need this, 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 and this. And y'all aren't listening to me.
Yep.
Like,
and
I
they're not
imagine
going
that'd be
to.
really easy to do.
So, and let's talk just a little bit about resources. So I know, like, we get into those situations of I need this and I need this and this is going to cost money, but you still got kids in front of you and you got to teach them whether you got stuff or not. So you have to learn to be resourceful. I had years where I decided that a voice lesson program was more important in my program than anything else. So I basically took my whole budget and worked things around and hired voice teachers where my kids didn't have to pay them so that I could build in the kids the importance of that. And so they paid like $4 for voice lessons their first year because I paid for them all. And I only took literature out of my library. While there wasn't a lot, I made it work. And then the next year, they paid $8 for a lesson, and I had a little bit more money to do things. And then the next year, they paid $12 a lesson. And then the fourth year, they were paying for the full lessons, and we were back rolling. And some of that is having the foresight to see down the road a long ways, and to build that long-term. You can try to go fast and get it done now, or you can kind of go slow and slow and steady and build it forever.
And what would you say? This is very niche, very specific question, but I just thought of this, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but I kind of thought, I feel like I've seen or heard of situations where the honest truth is that, I mean, I wish this wasn't always the case, but the honest truth is that some people end up in that kind of situation just because they needed a job and the school needed a director, and they may know deep down, I'm not necessarily in this for the long haul. Like, I'm not going to be here for more than a year or 2 years or whatever, for whatever the reason. And I wish that wasn't always the case, but the fact is sometimes that is the case. So what would you say to somebody that maybe they know, okay, I'm not going to be here for many years to build this up? Well, what is the best thing that they can do in the short time that they are going to be there, if that's the case?
Wow. Listen, so small schools, it's an interesting situation because in a lot of times in small schools, being communities, it's hard to find directors because especially if it's far out and driving and getting somebody to come into that community. So usually it's a spouse of somebody that has another job in town. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But usually the application pool is not huge in a lot of the positions, and that's not just choir. That can be in all core areas and everything. But the thing I can say is that if you are not going to the work at the top of your ability and willing to learn and grow during whatever short time you're going to be there, it's not fair to the kids. It's just not. I think if you're going to do it, you should do your best. And I know giving 110% is, everybody goes, well, you don't have 110% because you don't have 100. You only have 100. But you got to go above and beyond. You got to go above and beyond. You just have to. Because you owe it to those kids and to do your best. I think there's a scripture about that, if I can reference that.
Oh yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. So I kind of want to move back to a little bit about, you had mentioned the importance of tone and how that is one of the fundamental building blocks, especially, for any program, obviously, but especially if you find yourself in that kind of situation where it's like, okay, where do I even begin with this and building this up? Tone is a big one. I mean, tell us more about that.
Yeah. I feel like my choirs through the years have had better than average tone. I would say better than average. And about 8 years ago, I reached out to a friend saying, "Hey, I'm coming to the end of my career, or coming towards the end of my career, and I really want to have a choir at TMEA. I do. I mean, it was just a desire, a bucket list. I wanted the experience. I wanted the experience for my kids." And she came in and she was like, "Let's start. Let's get going," because she had had multiple TMEA choirs, and so she came in and she said, "Well, the first thing that's got to change is your tone." And I was like, "Okay." I mean, it's better than average. We get ones at UIL. And she's just like, yeah, you get ones at UIL, but you still sound young, like it doesn't sound mature.
Hmm.
And so you're going to have to make some changes in that. And that doesn't happen overnight. It just doesn't. Because about the time you kind of get those kids going, they graduate. And so it's a long process of getting that and building that tone. And so she also was like, your literature is not in great line with teaching great tone because of the things that I was choosing and what I liked. And my kids sang well. But so we started really analyzing and spending a lot of time with my literature and what I was choosing and doing lots more unison music than I was at the time. And I was doing some, but I wasn't doing a lot. Like I was with Clark Stanley, my assistant today, and we were picking the unison piece for every group. Like we have eight groups, and everyone has a unison piece. Some of them are singing the same unison piece together, but everyone has a unison piece so that we can really spend the first couple of weeks, several weeks, on establishing and setting that tone for the year. Although the older kids and the ones we've already had are going to return with that good tone, but they need reminders. And how to really build the voice. And the thing that she said to me, I think that resonated the most, is that I'm spending too much time trying to be a choir director, and I need to spend more time being their voice teacher. And so I started changing my perspective, and it took time because, kids don't like change any more than we do. And so it's hard. And so changing my perspective and what I was doing and how I was going about it. But then at some point, I decided to start sharing the goals of what I wanted and where I wanted to be and why we were doing it, and making them part of the process of them listening also to hear tone and listening to great recordings of choirs. And they're out there. And not necessarily, you don't want to listen to Voces 8 all the time because you want to be realistic. Although they're fantastic, but you need to put the recordings of the high schools in front of your kids that are comparable or better than them or bigger than them or worse than them. Like they need to hear, be able to compare and go, oh, that's not as good a tone. And so I spend a lot of time talking about it. I guess they're getting it. And so, yeah. I use a lot of voice lesson techniques. I don't spend time talking about warming up. I do spend time talking about technique because everybody comes to the classroom warm because they've been talking all morning and it's the same muscle.
We've heard that before as well, so that's good to hear that again.
Yeah, they need techniques on how to sing. They already know how to make sound. They just need techniques on how to sing and get that muscle built up.
So if someone is wanting to really, start developing the tone of their ensemble, is listening to recordings a good first step, at least in terms of, the hearing it, or what would you say for that?
Yeah, the tone needs to be the tone you're going to produce is the tone that's in your head. The tone you're going to produce is the tone that's in your head. So if you're listening to Willie Nelson all the time, and there's nothing wrong with Willie Nelson because I love country music. But if you're listening to Willie Nelson all the time and you're wondering why your choirs sound like Willie Nelson, well, that could be it. I had recordings from Denise Eaton's high school choir Spring that I was listening to all the time. I was listening to Montgomery with Heather Orr all the time. I was listening to Michael Zook at Vandegrift all the time. I was listening to Conspirare because that's even more real than Voces 8. I mean, and Conspirare is phenomenal and Grammys and all that kind of stuff. But that is some of the literature is even more accessible for us on the things we do. But I constantly was listening to them to get that tone, and then you got to get it in your kid's head, and then you got to figure out how you're going to make it. Your voice has to have multiple personalities. You just have to, because you can sing anything. Now, I would say an opera singer is probably not as good a country singer as possible, but they also can sing musical theater. and they also can sing jazz because it's the same different thing, same technique. They're just eliminating vibrato and putting bending the pitch here and moving the placement. It may be a little bit more nasal and a little bit more bright or a little bit more dark. And so making those sounds to create the different things, you're just looking how to make different sounds. And so building tone sometimes is just they have wrong placement. And you can teach them to put it in a different place. So we do lots of drills of like singing far back in our throat and then singing all the way to the front and making it real nasal and singing like Kermit the Frog and singing like Dudley Do-Right. Those are Joey Martin at Texas State comes in and does all those things with us, which is awesome. And but just finding that different placement on how to find that tone that you're looking for. Now, I will say, like, there is an expectation of type of tone when you're applying for TMEA. There just is. And it's got to be warm and round and full and tall and all those things. And it's got to be more mature. And if those are the things you're wanting to do, then you need to start putting that in your ear and listening to it and getting your kids to make those sounds. And then when you get picked, you got to hope that your kids make the sounds the next year.
Yeah, definitely. You need to have a standard. I mean, you can't fulfill what you do not define. If you don't have a place that you're going, and
Yep.
And I feel like it's a matter of just displaying that standard to your students over and over and over and over
and
again.
over and over.
I think my dad had told me one time, I think this was back when my mom was working at an elementary school, and there was a talent show going on or something like that. And I wasn't there, but my dad went, and afterward he came back and he told me, he was like, I was listening to a lot of those, fourth and fifth graders singing, songs that they really like. And you could tell that the way they were singing, they were trying to sound like the artist that sings the song. But you could tell, at least to someone that's familiar with, that's more of a musician, you could tell, well, that's not the way they actually sound when they sing.
Nope.
They're just trying, because their standard is what they've been listening to, which is understandable. I mean, like you said, we all do it, depending on who you listen to and what you expose yourself to. So that's why it's so important to have that, especially for younger students.
Or their environment or the situation that you're singing in. I'm a worship leader and lead worship regularly, and the how I sing there is not how I would sing when I was classically trained, and how I did opera or musical theater. It's just a completely different style or different voice or different placement. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's one of my many personalities.
Well, and I'd say I'm not an expert, obviously, and especially not like in the band side of things, but I would imagine this is applicable to every other kind of ensemble too. It might look a little different, but the same principles still apply.
Yeah, it is very much the same principle applies. I use a lot of strings with a lot of things that we do. I think that's one of the things that sets us apart, especially like with our recordings. We use strings, and I have professional people that play for us that are friends of mine that I've grown those friendships through the years, and they play regularly for us on our Christmas concerts and everything. And they also talk about it. Like we did a musical called Bright Star, which was written by Steve Martin, the comedian, and it was on Broadway, and it's all bluegrass. And when I handed them the music, they were like, this is going to be fun because it's not what we normally do. And you could hear them exploring those licks and that bending of the pitch and all that, and learning how to play the fiddle versus playing violin.
I like bluegrass a lot. We both like bluegrass. So that'd be cool to listen to. Cool.
Yeah. Have you ever heard that musical?
No, but I think I heard that Steve Martin did have a musical. So
it's an incredible show. It's called Bright Star, and we had a blast, and my kids loved it because it was so not us. So it's like, hey guys, we're going to sing a little bit more with some twang, and we're not going to be so concerned about your pitch.
Right. Awesome. Well, hey, this has been great. I mean, I think we got plenty of knowledge and wisdom from you to fill an episode for sure. But before we wrap up, I mean, is there anything else that's on your heart that you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I do. I want, I know people say this, but I really wanted people to understand small school's not small minded. It's not less than. It's not a less than job. It's not a shame to be in small schools teaching. The big jobs are not necessarily where it's at. Not knocking big jobs, because I've had those in the big schools too. But having a community school, being in a community school where you're part of a community versus a neighborhood school, which is slightly different because that's what you get in the larger cities. Like Rouse was a neighborhood school, wasn't a community school. There are advantages to being in that. When you get to the point where that community throws their full support behind you, which is what I've had for many years here in Marble Falls, there's nothing like it. There's really not. They push you to be your best all the time. And you want to be your best all the time. So do everything at the top level that you possibly can. And if you feel like it's not good enough, then go grow, go learn, go study, go ask questions. Don't sit back and wonder and hope and wish. Go do, go learn.
Great.
That's great.
There's the quote on the wall right there.
Yikes.
Perfect. No, that's great. That's great. Awesome. Well, Bryce, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Again, we really appreciate it. Before we go, for anybody listening that might want to connect with you or might want any more advice or, connect with your choir, what's a good way that they can reach you and your choir?
So the best way is like through email through the school system, marblefallsisd.org. There you can find me on Facebook. I also have an Twitter. Bryce Jason Gage 1 is my Twitter. There's Marble Falls High School Choir Twitter. That's the easiest way to connect me. You can also find me on the TMEA website. I mean, there's different ways to get my email and that kind of stuff. I'm willing to help.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad y'all asked me to do this.
Thank you. It's been great. We appreciate it. We'll have to have you on again sometime.
Anytime.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Beyond the Measure, a podcast for music educators. We hope you learned something that will help you stress less about how to teach so that you can focus more on who you're teaching. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a rating and review, subscribe, and share this podcast with other music educators. See you in the next one.